That's because what China wants to do eventually to the South and East China Seas is what the United States did to the Caribbean in the 19th and early 20th century. Dilute American influence in West Asia so that China could expand its continental landmass into the adjacent blue waters. The South China Sea has the potential to make China into a great military power in the way the Caribbean gave the United States domination of the Western Hemisphere.
And then you have the East China Seas, which is the area between China and Japan, basically.
Yes.
To me, this is the most dangerous because it involves two very big, rich countries, the second and third largest economies in the world, and countries with huge defense budgets. What could, we saw one version of what could happen. A ship captain takes his boat into these waters. Play out for us what you think could happen.
All right, first of all, the East China Sea is a more acute problem for the United States because, frankly speaking, the United States probably will not go to war to defend the Philippines. It's a poor country, it's a treaty ally, but not a serious one like Japan is. Japan's a real serious ally of the United States, and on holding back Japanese nationalism could be as much of a challenge for the United States in the future as dealing with Chinese nationalism. What could happen is, don't think of navies as just gray-hulled warships. The Chinese love to use navies as fishing boats, coastal patrol boats, Coast Guard vessels. Chinese fishermen could lay claim to a rock. The Japanese could try to intersect. You could have a tit-for-tat sort of incident that could escalate into a major exchange. So far, it's all been very formulaic. Asian countries like to strike poses. But it could escalate into something where neither side can pull back, and you could have what's been forecast a short, sharp war.
And you can imagine some crisis of the kind Bob is describing, and then neither side, the Chinese nor the Japanese, can back down because they can't appear weak to their publics.
Absolutely. And if you look at opinion polls in China and Japan recently, they're really very alarming. I mean, you get figures of over 90%, and people in China saying they don't trust Japan, and very similar figures in Japan. Remember, this is the second and the third biggest economy in the world. This is not just two small countries. But one of the other underlying risks is, as Bob said, you do get people talking about this idea of a short, sharp war. And there's this danger sense you get both from hawks in China and hawks in Japan that maybe we could have this fight and it could be isolated and we can control it. But when these things do start, it is very hard to control. It's very hard to just contain and limit it to a narrow conflict, and they can easily spiral out of control. And that's one of the underlying risks as well.
People thought that World War I would be a short, sharp war.
Everyone said we'd be home by Christmas.
What should the United States do? Because if there is this balancing act where if it tries to support its allies like the Philippines, Vietnam, let's call it de facto ally, it will get the Chinese to feel like the United States is trying to encircle them.
The United States needs to steer between two extremes. On the one hand, it has to prevent China from Finlandizing, if you will, countries like Vietnam and the Philippines and Malaysia. Meaning that Finland, because of its long land border with the Soviet Union during the Cold War, didn't really have control of its own foreign policy. And China is going to seek to do that in the countries of the South China Sea. But on the other hand, the United States cannot allow Vietnamese or Filipino nationalism to drag the United States into a military conflict with China, given how important the bilateral relationship between China and the U.S. is for the peace of the world in the 21st century.
So the United States, China, Japan, and all these Asian countries in this cauldron, as you describe it, almost certainly going to be one of the big next crises that we face in foreign policy. Thank you both. Fantastic.
Thank you.